All right, good morning. Benjamin Hadfield, Teach Me to Dive, technical dive instructor in Idaho and Florida, teaching the masses how to dive. We've got a special guest this morning. I put on my white shirt for him and everything to make sure we were giving him the due courtesy that he certainly deserves. Today, Nuno Gomes is one of 4 men who've dived with SCUBA using trimix below 300 meters or past 1,000 feet. It's huge. There are only 3 other people, Ahmed Gabbard, Mark Elliott, and the late John Bennett. Now, first, Nuno held the world record for the deepest cave dive done in Boesman Gat, South Africa, to a depth of 927 feet. But wait, that was in 1996, and this cave is located at altitude of 5,000 feet. So this gives us a correlation depth or sled of 1,112 feet. The dive time was 12 hours. We're definitely going to talk about that. If that's not enough, Nuno continued on and he went to set the open water depth record of 1,044 feet in 2005 in the Red Sea. Nuno, thank you for coming in today.
It's a pleasure.
Excellent. Well, Nuno, how did you get started in diving?
Well, basically, I read Cousteau like many other people, and I thought this is a good thing, you know. And basically, I started with spearfishing when I was like a kid. And then when I went to university, I joined the club and started diving. And it went from there on, you know. Some of the first dives that I did were like salvage dives. In fact, I started doing some salvage even before I had completed my pool training. And you know, it was fun, and I enjoyed it, and I've been diving ever since.
Wow. Now, you got into cave diving quite a while ago. And in cave diving, when you started, it was really kind of in its infancy. Can you tell us about your journey into the world of cave diving?
Well, I was living in Johannesburg, South Africa, and it's quite far from the sea, about 600 kilometers, about close to 400 miles. So the nearest places to dive were caves. So then it was if I wanted to dive, I had to go dive in caves and sinkholes and the like, and so that's what I did. And you know, I enjoyed it, and I carried on from there onwards. And well, now that I'm living in New York, it's hard to do cave diving over here.
Sure,
So if I want to do any cave diving, the nearest place is Florida. But also Florida is probably one of the better places in the US to dive, because you can do sea diving, cave diving. The water's nice, it's clear, both in the caves and in the sea. It's probably the better place to dive in the US, I would say. So whenever I go down to Florida, I do some diving, wherever. So the one thing about the US, it's difficult to do the ultra deep diving in the US. You know, well, you can dive fairly deep, but not ultra deep. You know, the deepest dives were done by Brett Hemphill. I think he got close to 570 feet. And unfortunately, he passed away recently from a cave diving accident. But I think he did the deepest dive in the US. And it's 570 feet, which is deep, but it's not ultra deep. So it's hard to find somewhere to do the ultra deep dives in the US. even if you go in Florida, you have to go very, very far offshore to find somewhere where it's ultra deep. So,
Sure.
so I would say if somebody wants to do the ultra deep dives, one would probably have to go to Mexico. There are quite a few spots there where one can dive quite deep. Like the late Czech actually dived in Zacaton in Mexico, and that was really deep.
Sure.
And also in the sea, some blue holes have been found off the coast of Mexico that are really deep, in excess of 300 meters. So that's a possibility for someone wanting to do that kind of deep diving.
Absolutely. So, Nuno, what certifications do you have? Tell me about that.
Okay, so my qualifications are CMAS. So I'm a instructor trainer, trimix, advanced trimix, cave, rack, gas blending. I can instruct in any of those fields.
Okay. So
cave diving, everything. Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. So how did you decide to go set a world record in being the deepest open water diver in 2005? How did that come about?
Well, so when I did my cave record, look, I was going progressively deeper and deeper every time.
Mm-hmm.
But as I went deeper, somebody else went deeper. And I kept on going deeper, but somebody else kept on going a little bit deeper. Eventually, I was asked to try and recover the body of a diver at Boesmansgat by the police. And I told this friend of mine, he's not a friend of mine, look, I'd have to do a world record dive to be able to try and recover the body of this diver. And I told him, I'll think about it. And after a couple of months, I thought, okay, I'm going to give it a shot. So I'm going to go to the deepest point because the ROV had been in that cave looking for the body and hadn't found it. But the ROV hadn't got as deep as it was possible to go. So, okay, I'm going to stick to the deeper part. We did a lot of surveying of the cave until I found the deepest point. Of course, the Boesmansgat varies in depth depending to the water table level. So the water table goes up and down. So sometimes it's a little bit deeper, sometimes a little bit shallower. But so I did a lot of measurements with a sonar, and I arrived at the maximum depth of 290 meters. Wow. So I decided, okay, that's the spot where I'm going to go. Because you can swim along the roof of the cave and you can point the sonar down and find the spot. So I marked the spot on the roof of the cave where the deepest point was. So the idea was to go with a reel inside the cave on the roof and drop the line down to the deepest spot. That's what we did. So after I did the dive, it wasn't, I got a depth that was less than 290. But I don't know how accurate my depth was, but I always claimed less than what I thought it was. Some people always claim the maximum. I tend to claim somewhere between the minimum and the average.
Okay.
So if I claim a depth, I definitely went deeper. But I don't like to claim the maximum. the most I'll claim is what I think is the average depth. So then I did the dive. I didn't find the body. Eventually, the body was found, and it was shallower than what I had done. It was somewhere between the shallowest part of the bottom and the maximum part of the bottom. So, that's how it happened. Then that record remained the record for the deepest dive and the deepest cave dive for a long, long time. And then John Bennett came along and did the sea record, which was around 308 meters. So that became the Guinness record. Okay, it was in the sea. Mm-hmm. So the Guinness World Record don't distinguish between sea dives and cave dives. They just say ultimate depth is what counts.
Okay.
So John Bennett then had the record. And then I started, in the meantime, I got involved in diving and filming coelacanths off the coast of South Africa. And these coelacanths were at the depth of about 400 feet, 120 meters. So we were doing like 15-minute bottom time on open circuit with SCUBA in the sea. And there was a strong current there. There were like about 4 knots.
Oh, wow.
So you have to do like a hot drop and then swim down quickly to the continental shelf, to the drop off, and then search in the caves next, on the drop off of the continental shelf until we found the coelacanths and filmed them. We were doing this for the BBC, and we managed to do it. We managed to get good footage. So after that, I thought, wow, sea diving, this is good. Maybe I must also try and do a world record in the sea. So I started looking, where am I going to do this? It's going to be really difficult off the coast of South Africa. I had dived all along the coast of South Africa. I mean, I did my commercial training in Simonstown in the Cape. And I knew, and I dived in Namibia, all over Mozambique, all these places. And I thought, you have to go real far to find a deep spot. Mm-hmm. So I started searching, and eventually I thought, the Red Sea is the place. Because it drops straight down. I mean, not far from the shore. I mean, 2 years ago, I was in the Red Sea off the coast of Dahab. You can drop to 700, 800 feet. From doing a shore dive, 300 feet from the side of the coast, you can get 800 feet, 900 feet.
Wow. Now, how's the current?
There's no current.
Oh, even better.
And the water is clear and warm. So obviously, if the wind starts blowing, you do get some current. Because, the wind causes the current. But it's mostly surface. Mm-hmm. Once you go deep, there's nothing. Or very little. So I thought, this is the place. I'm going to do it in the Red Sea. So I set it all up. It took a while to organize. And the first time it didn't work out. I got down to 271 meters and my regulator stopped working. So I went through a whole process of trying to survive and I managed. And then we thought, okay, let's come back the following year and do it again. So we came back the following year and we did it, and it worked. And
how do you put something like this together? The expense on doing a deep dive like this has got to be immense.
Yeah, there's a lot of expense, that's for sure. I mean, you spoke to Karen van den Over, and you can see how expensive it is. And that's doing it locally, it's expensive. If you have to travel and fly somewhere with all the equipment, it becomes even more expensive.
Sure.
And it's difficult to get sponsorship. So you can get some sponsorship, but you still have to spend quite a bit of your own money. And you have to have team members that are prepared to kind of help you pro bono. You know, if they are prepared to help you and join in on the adventure, then it's useful. But if you have to finalize everything on your own cost, it's really expensive. Look, diving manufacturers will say, okay, here's a couple of regulators, DVs, you can have that, some fins, you know, a buoyancy compensate. So they will give you some stuff. But in the end, you have to self-sponsor yourself. And of course, any little bit of help is welcome, but it does get expensive.
I bet.
It's not like a money-making venture whatsoever.
You mean there's not money in diving? Wait, stop.
Yeah. Well, look, I know very few people that have made money out of diving. But look, it's possible to make some money, but I don't think you're going to be rich.
No, that is for sure. That is for sure. So you get through the expense of this. So, I mean, let's talk about the logistics for a moment. For example, in the pictures, we've all seen the picture. You've got 4 huge tanks set together in manifolds on your back by itself. I mean, did you set that up there? Did you bring that with you?
Those I had to fly there.
Okay.
And that in itself is a problem. Because look, the tanks have to be empty, without valves.
Sure.
And in Egypt, they're always looking for terrorists and whatever. So that at the customs, they take a light and look inside the tank and shake it around one by one.
Oh my goodness. How many tanks did you fly over?
I only flew those 4.
Okay.
The rest, Planet Divers supplied. So the Planet Divers themselves were sponsors in that they said, okay, some of the people can stay for free. The gas you have to buy, things like that.
Sure.
So they assisted in supply. They have an endless amount of tanks. So the stages, you just have to make sure that you've got all the fittings for the stages. Because on that dive, I used like 30 tanks.
Wow.
And here's the thing. Open circuit versus rebreathers.
Okay.
I think this is always the issue. Using a rebreather does make it simpler.
Mm-hmm.
And we could say easier. But of course, it's from my point of view, I think it's a lot riskier because a lot of things can go wrong with a rebreather. And even the cleverest of divers make mistakes with rebreathers and they ultimately die. So it's been quite bad with the rebreathers. I mean, there have been quite a lot of fatalities, but divers are prepared to balance the situation and decide, okay, I'm prepared to take the additional risk and use a rebreather because, okay, I don't use so much helium, this and that, and it's lighter. But okay, that's up to them to decide. And of course, you use a lot less helium, so it's going to be cheaper. But of course, the rebreather is far more expensive as well, and the maintenance is quite high, and you need to make sure everything is working. And if something goes wrong, and you might not even notice that something went wrong, and of course, then it's bad news. But anyway, the dives were all done on open circuit. It's simple. If you can breathe, it's working.
Yeah, fair enough. So once you decided to put all this together, tell me about the planning portion of getting everything to the Red Sea, building up the timetables, everything like that. What did that look like?
Well, typically it will take about a year to put it together, because you have to first get all the people that are going to be involved to the location where you're going to do the dive.
Mm-hmm.
Then all of them have to have accommodation, and they must be prepared to write off like at least 2 weeks. So that's why lately you can see a lot of divers are diving with a very, very small team, because it's difficult to get all the people to commit to be at a certain location for that period of time. But anyway, you have to make a list of all the equipment that you need. You need to test all that equipment as best as you can.
Sure.
And you have to make sure when you arrive at the location that everything is still working. So you have to do a lot of test dives building up to it. Typically you're going to do at least 5 to 10 dives before you do the actual dive.
Sure.
I always do that anyway, because if you haven't dived for a week, you need to acclimatize.
Mm-hmm.
So as you're acclimatizing, you're testing the equipment progressively. Eventually, you're going to end up doing a dive maybe to about at least 400 feet as like a test dive, maybe a little bit deeper, maybe 500 feet. And then you're going to stop diving for about 2-3 days, and then you're going to do the actual record dive. So all the time you're working your way deeper and deeper, but all the time you are using the final equipment configuration that you'll use in the record dive. So you're not going to have anything different. It's going to be the same all the time.
Of course. So I want to talk a little bit about that acclimatization that you talked about earlier. So are you saying you're becoming more acclimatized to things like nitrogen narcosis and the weight of the gas?
Well, look, I think well, that's a debatable thing about nitrogen narcosis.
It is.
If you can be acclimatized to it or not. I think there's definitely a certain degree of acclimatization as far as nitrogen narcosis is concerned. But the other thing is your body. You in-gassing and out-gassing. So as you out-gassing, you kind of cleaning cleaning your system from like micro bubbles and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you're getting used to decompressing for longer and longer. And if you have any problems, you'll pick them up. So if you get a small bend from one of the build-up dives, then that's basically the end of the story. So then you need to start again from scratch, maybe a few months later or the next year. But I think the most important thing in the acclimatization is being used to your equipment configuration even more.
Okay.
So, for instance, when I was at 271 meters and my main regulator stopped working,
mm-hmm.
I switched over to the bailout tank, which had a different regulator. And fortunately, it worked. So, I mean, for most people, switching regulators at that kind of depth is something that you wouldn't think of doing. But you need to practice that procedure at deeper depths.
Wow.
You know that. For instance, if you take like Dave Shaw, he was at the bottom of Bushman's also at around 270 meters.
Mm-hmm.
And he was on his rebreather and he had bailout tanks. And he never switched from the rebreather to the bailout tanks. And he was having a problem breathing. You could see that his CO2 was building up and up. He didn't do it. Why didn't he do it? Probably because he hadn't practiced that kind of thing at that extreme depth. So you need to, I mean, when I was diving for the coelacanths at like 400 feet, it was changing regulators at that kind of depth was like the thing that we did all the time, because we used two independent back cylinders. And you have to switch from one to the other to keep the same pressure on both cylinders as much as you can. So that kind of thing should all be second nature to you. So, and also the team needs to practice reaching you as support divers on time. And that, in the first dive that I did, practice record dive, didn't go well. Some of the divers arrived like half an hour late. And so the surface marshal must know exactly when these things happen. Also, when you're doing these very deep dives, the possibility of isobaric counter-diffusion or decompression of the middle ear, decompression sickness of the middle ear, is a very distinct possibility. No matter how careful you are in choosing the gases and the switches and whatever, it can happen. If you get that and you are deep, your chances of dying, if you don't have a support diver right next to you, are very, very good. Because you lose all sense of direction or up and down. And, you start, you have the feeling that you are spinning out of control. And a number of divers have died because of that. So if your support divers don't know what to do or what's going on and don't know how to help you, then, that's the end of the story. So there's a lot of stuff to practice.
That brings up a good point of making sure to practice in position as well. not just acclimatizing to the feeling of the breathing, but acclimatizing to the pressure and accomplishing things, switching regulators, isolating. That's such a great point.
And there's another thing. For instance, as you go deeper and deeper, you get high pressure nervous syndrome. So that makes it even more difficult to accomplish simple procedures, because your hands are shaking and your whole body eventually will be shaking. So it's difficult, very difficult. There are all kinds of things that can happen to you. And hopefully the support divers can help you. But ultimately, you yourself must be prepared for those eventualities and what you'll do if it happens.
Absolutely. So on this dive in the Red Sea, I would imagine you had to have felt at least some degree of HPNS. How did that feel?
I definitely felt it, and that's what stopped me from going deeper. Because the rope that I had was 341 meters long. And my final actual depth was like 321 about, or somewhere between 321 and 323, even though I climbed 318.25. As usual, I always claim the least.
Sure.
But that's what stopped me from going deeper. I was just shaking out of control, and it was really difficult. And yeah, that brings me to another issue: the issue of gas narcosis. That plays a major role. A lot of divers think that nitrogen is the only narcotic gas.
Mm-hmm.
That is, to my way of thinking, that's not true at all. All gases are narcotic, the most narcotic being carbon dioxide. And here's the problem. As you go deeper and deeper, as you know, the gas becomes denser in your lungs. Mm-hmm. What that means is that you are not able to vent your lungs very well. So if you're not able to vent your lungs very well, the carbon dioxide is building up. Carbon dioxide is about 13 times more narcotic than nitrogen. And if you take helium, it's about a quarter as narcotic as nitrogen. So it's also narcotic.
Really?
So, yes, oxygen is also narcotic.
Sure.
A little bit more narcotic than nitrogen. I've done a study, and the density of the gas correlates very well with the solubility of the gas. And solubility of the gas correlates very well with narcosis. That is relative narcotic potency. In fact, I've written a paper about it. It's in academia. But the bottom line is that by the time you get to that kind of depth, even if you have very little nitrogen in the blend, there's going to be quite a bit of narcosis. You can see, for instance, when Hannes Keller, this is going back quite a bit. When Hannes Keller did the 300-meter dive, where they came out of a bell, there was no nitrogen in the mix, in the blend. It was just oxygen. I think 8% it was, which is crazy for that kind of depth.
Yes.
And the rest was helium, 92% helium. When the two divers came out of the bell, which makes the dive a whole lot easier, they struggled with just putting up the flag, the American flag at the bottom of the sea. It's a simple task.
Sure.
And there was no nitrogen. There should have been zero narcosis, theoretically. But they weren't able to do that simple task. And eventually they got into trouble, and one of the divers eventually went on to die. But you can talk to other divers that have been deep and have had very little nitrogen in the blend, and there's been narcosis. And I, from myself, that have done quite a few deep dives, know for a fact that as you go past 240 meters, no matter what blend you have, you suddenly feel, there's narcosis coming on. I mean, I know narcosis very well because I've done like a lot of 100-meter dives on air. So I know exactly what it feels like. In the chamber, I did, I don't know how many dives to 100 meters on air, a lot. And you get seriously narcosed. I've done it in the water as well. And somehow you get slightly less narcosed in the water than in the chamber for some reason. But I know that exactly how narcosed I'm feeling. And so one needs to consider, and in my paper, you can calculate exactly the narcosis level. Of course, it varies from diver to diver, so it's not accurate by any means. But it gives you some indication of what you can expect. So, narcosis is always a problem when you're diving deep.
Wow. If you would, we'll make sure to put a link to your paper in the notes of this interview as well. I think that'd be wonderful. Well, Nuno, I'd like to break this into two parts, and so there's a lot to digest in what we've just gone through. So we're gonna give people a little bit of time to digest the amazingness of Nuno Gomes in this. So again, Benjamin Hadfield, Teach Me to Dive. If you like this kind of content, make sure to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification button, because we've got a part 2 coming up of Nuno.
Okay.
Nuno, thank you so much for being a part of this.
Okay, perfect.